Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz, and this season we will be unpacking real trends, hot topics in the workplace around allyship and inclusion. Our goal is that each week you leave with tangible tools, information, practical strategies that you can take back to allies at your organization. Let's dig in to this week's topic. Welcome, allies. So excited to be kicking off season 12. And it's been a journey to get here. And what we've heard most from our listeners is that you want to hear directly from us. What trends, what strategies, what problems, opportunities are you seeing real time in the workplace and in our personal spaces, which we know the balance of personal and professional has never been so integrated. And it brings me to share some thoughts on one of the key trends that I think most organizations aren't paying attention to that absolutely should be and could be very much surprised. And it's the interwoven relationship between ESG, which stands for environmental, social governance, and DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you think about those two acronyms, where they're really tethered together is under the S of ESG. Social has a lot to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And so what we know is coming down in regulation, specifically in Europe in 2024, so not too far away, is the call for greater transparency of metrics, specifically and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I had the opportunity to chat with one of our esteemed guests that we've had on the podcast before, Dora Lutz, who's a thought leader in social impact and principles of ESG. And the way she broke it down just really resonated with me. And so I had the opportunity to share this in our latest Forbes piece that I wrote, but I thought it might be helpful to also share it here as a kickoff to the podcast because this is kind of a little known fact. I haven't been able to find that much research or information to support this connection between ESG and DEI, and specifically the metrics that any business that's doing work globally, specifically in Europe, you're going to be expected to report increasingly on information. And that might come as a surprise. And I would hate for organizations to be surprised about this. So it's really a great opportunity to continue to build the momentum that's somewhat been lost in 2023 here, specifically in the US around diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is an opportunity to build upon the existing momentum of ESG. And so, what's interesting about this is it's really not asking organizations to do anything tremendously differently. Okay. It's actually building off of existing metrics that you're probably already tracking or should be tracking anyway. And so, specifically, what ESG is calling for with the S, the social piece, is demonstrating that you have an effective DEI program to support your social goals. So this could be things like pay equity, representation, education goals. Okay, so being able to showcase you have an effective program and that you have an empowered DEI effort with diverse viewpoints. Okay, and so this is what's driving the corporate governance piece as well. And then having a strategy around DEI also helps to demonstrate what organizations will be soon expected to report on. And so, if you think about this, what I would encourage you to do is be ready before it's too late. So, according to the Global Reporting Index, that provides qualitative and quantitative metrics on diversity and equity around ESG as a framework, there's specifically three metrics that they will be calling organizations to report on, and that is diversity of the governance bodies and employees, so representation numbers, which for most global organizations, getting into your HR, IS system, human resources information system, is not usually too cumbersome to pull those numbers. And this is across your employee base as a whole. And we know front lines tend to be more dominated with diverse groups of folks, and then we lose that diversity as you go up. So encourage you to push yourselves a little harder and make sure you're separating it at the senior leadership level, mid-management level and front lines at a minimum, if not more cuts, depending on the size of your organization, because that really tells the story of that infamous broken rung that often happens to women, folks of color, those with disabilities, those in the LGBTQ plus community. That representation doesn't tend to dominate at the top levels as it does in the bottom levels, sadly. And then, so the second metric that you're going to be expected to report on is the ratio of basic salary and remuneration. Complicated word, of women to men. And so what this is asking for is pay equity, and it's basic salary numbers. So this isn't, again, super cumbersome, as I would argue. We need to take more cuts and make sure we're looking at similar roles and really making sure that we're promoting and advancing on a gender equity basis, as many organizations struggle with this. But look at the basic salaries of women to men. And of course, gender is not binary, so you probably would want to have a third category for gender neutral, especially if you're of a larger size. You probably have a sizable part of your employee base that may identify not binary as a woman or a man. So, important notes there. And then the third metric that will be coming soon to be expected to be reporting on is operations within your local community. So, how are you engaging? How are you doing impact assessments and developmental programs? And so, this is really interesting, community engagement, which a lot of companies love to do this, and publicize their efforts. And that's great. Sure, it's genuine. I love the work that, Ben and Jerry's does, Patagonia. I mean, these are, very advanced organizations on the ESG front, but they are very specific about the issues that they're going to engage in and how they do their community engagement around that. Ben and Jerry's is very, very tightly focused on racial equity, and Patagonia is very, very focused on climate change, right? You can see this in the way that they support things, the way they speak out about issues, the way that they do their social media, etc. And so, what I'd encourage you to do is really have a very specific focus on your community engagement components and be really diligent about how you show up, and especially in your local community. That's just a missed opportunity to get your word out about the great work that your organization is doing and impacting future employees, folks that you hope to serve in your local community. So, what a great opportunity. And also, partner with existing nonprofits that are doing great work. I think sometimes we reinvent the wheel and we don't need to. There's great organizations likely right in your backyard that you can support. And what better way to find out than ask employees? And that also drives more engagement from them in the process. So, keynote here, if you learn nothing else from today's podcast episode, future legislation from the EU will drive forthcoming reporting expectations for businesses. So, again, those top three, and I'll put this in the show notes: diversity of your governance bodies and employees, ratio of basic salary information, and operations within your local community. So, you will be expected to report on these things. You will need quantitative proof of your organization's past DE efforts as a way to clearly demonstrate leadership in ESG. And now is the time. I mean, what a great opportunity to proactively address this and strengthen your efforts to showcase your successes. This is a potential opportunity for that first mover advantage over your competition. Culture is not easy to mimic. People strategies, especially social strategies, are not done overnight. They need to be genuine, tied to your culture, and that's not something your competitors will be able to replicate in short order. So, thinking about how you prioritize DE efforts despite the current political environment, utilize that ESG framework and position you for long term success by clearly aligning diversity within your broader business strategy. That enhances your social impact, drives stakeholder satisfaction, and builds upon that competitive advantage. Thank you for listening to the Diversity Pivot podcast. My hope is that you walked away with a tangible tool, insight, or information that you can share with other allies on the journey. If you liked this week's episode, please leave us a review. Your feedback means a tremendous amount to us. We'll be back next week with another hot topic.